Good afternoon, everybody. I'd first like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, their leaders, past, present and emerging, and also Aboriginal people here today. It gives me great pleasure and a little bit of nervousness public speaking again after 2 years, but to welcome a presentation by Miss Lusia Sefo-Leau, who is the CEO of the Pacific Water and Wastewater Association. Lucia will be talking to us by pre-record, and then she'll be live for the Q&A as mentioned before. So please have your questions ready. Lucia has held this the position of CEO for since 2016. And as you may know, the Pacific Water and Wastewater Association is a not-for-profit organisation established in 1994 to support the Pacific region in meeting all water challenges, both at the national and regional level. Lucia has also helped to establish the PWWA as a permanent regional organisation for Pacific Water and Wastewater in Samoa. With 30 years experience in finance and tax reform policy, including the CEO of the Samoan Ministry for Revenue for 6 years, she was also the Deputy CEO for the Samoan Ministry of Finance. This long career as a public servant has included work in other ministries for Samoa, such as the Prime Minister's Office, and 3 years as an advisor to the Board of Directors at the AWP. She's a recipient of the Samoa Public Service Prestigious Excellence Award for Inspirational Leadership, and hopefully this presentation will inspire you as we start to think about our work going forward in the Pacific, especially around climate change. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rowan, for that kind introduction. And thank you also for the opportunity to do this presentation. I will be speaking generally on this topic of water security and climate change from a Pacific perspective in the first half of my presentation. Then I will talk about who we are as an organization and what VWWA is all about. So let me get right into our presentation. There is no escaping the fact that the Pacific, compared to all other regions of the world, has the lowest levels of access to water and sanitation. And I have posed here 2 rhetorical questions for all of you to ponder on. And they are the current development models adequate? Are the current architecture of our models adequate? The SDG 2030 and the fact that the Pacific, compared to all other regions of the world, has the lowest levels of access to water and sanitation, and that's SDG 6. And the question is why? Countries in the Pacific are also amongst the most vulnerable in the world due to severe weather and natural hazards. They have a strong dependence on their natural resources, and they have limited diversification of their economies. Climate change impacts already directly threaten the availability of food and water, the productivity of ecosystems and breeding grounds, reef and fisheries resources, and the effectiveness of natural coastal defenses. But its huge impact on island country resources, water resources, is profound. And there is no shortage of data and statistics of frameworks that track how the Pacific countries fare in terms of the SDGs and in terms of SDG 6 on water and SDG 13 on climate change action. And yet these statistics tell us the Pacific lags behind the rest of the world with regards to these targets. On the other hand, despite the very small contribution of Pacific Island countries on CO2 emissions to the global environment, they are on track with their actions to mitigate the effects of climate change on the environment. And the actions in respect of accelerating renewable energy sources, for example, are commendable. But then we look at the statistics of communities without access to water and sanitation facilities. the horrendous impact of climate change related disasters on the same water safety, and what are the actions taken to mitigate the impacts? What are these statistics telling us? What is missing on our joint efforts? Are the development models inadequate? And is the development architecture of our times focusing too much on processes and less on direct impact on the center of all development, which is people? I have no solutions. What are these telling us? What is missing in our joint efforts? Tropical Cyclone Harold was probably one of the worst ever cyclones in the Pacific in recent times because of the trail of destruction it did across the Pacific, ending in Tonga as a Cat 5 cyclone. And witness here in our pier the strength of Cyclone Harold, for example, the impacts of heavy rainfall in the township. This has never been seen or has never happened before, at least in my lifetime. But natural disasters of this severity will be a thing of the future. The damages to people's livelihood, to commerce, to businesses, infrastructure, and the economy as a whole was tremendous in Samoa at the end of 2020, on top of losses due to border closures from the pandemic. It would be remiss of me not to include COVID-19 in this discussion, especially in respect of water security. The global pandemic has a deep and prolonged impact on every country. Pacific is dependent primarily on tourism. And with the closure of borders, many tourism operators went out of business. Many lost their jobs and the growth of social problems were highlighted. Combined with poor access to water and sanitation facilities in some countries, this accelerated the growth of COVID, affected people when it hit. Only 5 countries in the Pacific remain free of COVID. That's Tuvalu, Tokelau, Niue, Nauru, and FSM. They are some of our smallest members, and 2 of those countries, Tuvalu and FSM, have vaccination rates in the 20s and 30s only. So yes, it is no longer business as usual. We need to be building water resilience, not only in the face of climate change, but in the face of a changing environment brought about by COVID-19. So what can we do? As development partners, how can we help? Remember those 2 questions I posed earlier? Well, most, if not all, countries in the Pacific are driven by economic growth measures of GDP, with the notion that the growth in the economy will drive growth in all other areas of the country. Does that model still work for where we are at today? I would dare to suggest, no, it is no longer enough. I think policymakers should put at the top of for the next 10 years, people's well-being measured excuse me, by rates of access to basic needs for water and sanitation, basic health and education, the rate of employment, and I think the rest will follow, meaning the economy will prosper. I mean, look at the MDGs. After 20 years of that and SDGs, the Pacific has not improved in respect of SDG 6. So we need a transformational shift from economic development targeting GDP to targets that measure well-being during these times. We need, and I have been probably singing about this forever to utilities, we need integrated efforts. We can no longer just work to provide pipes and water to our mandated clients, but we need to think beyond that and before that. And boy, do we need adaptation solutions to our climate challenges. And with every challenge, there is an opportunity for positive action, no matter how hard it is to identify. We know as people in the water environment, we know how hard hit water utilities are and how hard hit people's livelihoods are with the severity of climate change and related disasters and this COVID. With the latter, COVID, action in every country has been swift and assistance has been swift, even to water utilities. I am pleased that we all had responded urgently in our capacities to the needs of utilities in this respect. And I trust these assistance will continue for some time. And I suspect COVID action-related plans will accelerate actions by governments to improving safe access to water and sanitation to the countries lacking behind in the Pacific. And as partners, we need to continually bring that link up and advocate it. But do we know of priority actions in the Pacific in respect of climate change? Go look at the nationally determined commitments of each country in the Pacific and see what part of those commitments have any focus on water resource management and water supply. You will find that perhaps only 3 countries have a section on adaptation with a strong focus on water resource management. What is that saying? Sorry, excuse me. That as nations, we are either tired of writing action plans, that happens, or those doing or writing up these action plans are far removed from the realities on the ground. Or worse, we are failing to draw the link. That happens too. Brings to my mind the box ticking exercise of development processes and frameworks and the rush to spend towards the end of a program. But anyway, I digress from my slide and what we need to do and pursue. We need policymakers to prioritize water and sanitation simply because 2 of the biggest disasters of current times, and that is climate change and COVID, will set us back hugely, socially, economically, and as human beings. We need integrated and coordinated efforts. We need policymakers and leaders listening to communities and their needs. We need policymakers to analyze the statistics, the data, the scientific researchers, and be bold in taking the necessary actions to prioritize sustainable solutions. We need to improve access to finance for adaptation, finance for improving access to water in rural communities, finance that build the resilience of communities and infrastructure that serves them to the effects of climate change and natural disasters. And we need partnerships for accelerated action, partnerships that work through utilities, civil society, scientific organizations, and all levels of government. And we need, most of all, political leaders that make well-informed decisions, leaders who are not afraid to call to action the private sector of their social obligations, rather than just reaping profits from infrastructure put in and paid for by the government. We need targeted support to build institutional and human capacity in organizations that service communities. I just wanted to put this slide in of Samoa Water Authority at work after the floods in December 2020, because it just simply shows a really good effort at teamwork and a response, quick response of the team at Samoa Water Authority to the problems that they faced. Now I come to the second part of my presentation, as I had said, VWWA and its role. It is the Pacific's only and most inclusive platform for water and wastewater, I'd like to think. It is the primary coordination body for 30 utilities across 21 Pacific countries. And by working through PWWA to support these utilities, AWP builds Australia's profile in the region as a trusted and valued development partner. What makes us different? Well, there's inclusivity in it. It's a multi-level organization recognized in Samoa as an international organization that caters to the needs of the region. And it's also a national one in the sense that member countries, utilities belong to it and advocate for it in their own countries. It's multi-stakeholder. We have a political level of responsibility in PWWA in water ministers level. And we have also public sector utilities, which are mostly government ministries and state-owned enterprises. It also promotes public-private partnerships through our membership, allied membership, which are mostly private sector industrial members. We also have civil society members or NGOs that belong to VWWA. And its focus, it's on basically utility performance improvement. And this is surveyed and analyzed annually through the benchmarking survey that we do. It has stewardship leadership. Well, you know, it used to have, before COVID, it used to have an annual ministerial forum where political leaders in water come together and discuss basically progress of each country in terms of SDG 6. And it was a good forum for advocating for progress in that. It has a council made up of CEOs of 31 utilities from 21 countries and territories, and a 10-member board of directors with a 3-year tenure, which meets at least twice a year. We have an executive board that constitutionally is supposed to meet at least 6 times a year, inclusive of the meetings of the full board. And we have a small but effective secretariat that coordinates the programs and policies for the organization. Currently, the approved programs that we had, benchmarking, the annual conference and expo sharing, which shares experiences and solutions, the annual water ministers meeting, the young water professionals program, and we had board governance and financial training. These are a mixture of some of the programs that we had approved over the last 3 years. Unfortunately, with the onset of the pandemic, we haven't been able to meet physically in the annual conference for the past 2 years. And it is likely that we won't meet either this year, given the disastrous impact of COVID on the Solomon Islands that I just saw yesterday. People are dying in the hospitals. It simply can't cope with the high numbers of people catching COVID. And with a vaccination rate that's only about 27%, it's going to be a long haul for the poor country. So after COVID, we had some revisions to the programs that we had. Our benchmarking, of course, continues, as this is mostly done online, but we had some refresher courses for this exercise as well. We continue with the Young Water Professionals program online, and we also had a Pacific COVID response network and connectivity enhancement project that AWP was kind enough to approve and for which funds were diversified from the Young Water Professionals program. Very small project, but with big impact. We continue to have online workshops and webinars, such as the ADB WASH program, World Bank benchmarking survey. We continue to have courses on that. We also have diagnostic studies of utilities ongoing at the moment, starting with 5 utilities. And we hope that with the framework now established for the study, that this will continue through the rest of the other utilities. We have regular monthly meetings for our allied members, and which draws in some of the utilities to speak with the allied members. We currently have a collaboration on gender and inclusive WASH research with the Institute for Sustainable Futures of the University of Technology in Sydney. A small project, but also I feel projects that have big impact on data and informing decisions of countries. We also currently are developing a program with the Pacific Climate Change Center with SPREP, and this is training for enhancing climate resilience and safe water access in the Pacific. So that is a new technical program that we are collaborating with SPREP on to start in May. So, supposed to sum up my presentation, I'd just like to speak a little about the partnership that we've had with AWP. And I'd like to say that we have had a successful 6 years with mutual benefits to both partners. The building of capacity of future leaders is one of that very important and valuable program that we had with the Young Water Professionals program. We've also had improvement on our board and also executive management of utilities through the governance program that we had. And then, like I had mentioned before, the PACRIN and connectivity enhancement, which provided for us a very important platform to connect during the first year of COVID, and we continue to use that currently. It had also provided technical support for PWWA in the conference through the expertise that members of the AWP have been able to speak on. So yes, and of course, very important, the direct operational support for the Secretariat that we've had. And I think because that is a critical assistance to the effective operation of any organization, I think, because donor partners normally go for programs, for funding of programs, and neglect the support provided for a secretariat that coordinates those programs. So I'd like to say thank you very much to AWP and the partnership that we've had over the years, 6 years now, and we hope that that will continue over, you know, the next 3 years. Okay, that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention.